you get in here? Security! Security! Well, seeing you're here, and seeing as I was asked such a long time ago to do a video on how I got interested in comic books by Captain Cummings, I suppose I better do it now. Hello, MAW00001 by the way, just in case you didn't realise. I mean, that's what it says up the top there, so yeah. Anyway, to start off with, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a history lesson, because I think the way I got into comics might be a little bit different to the way a lot of other people got into comics. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm British. I come from the United Kingdom. And there, they had, most of the comics there were weekly comics, and they were black and white. And this is the sort of comic that we used to read when I was younger. Battle. A lot of them were war comics, and inside it was mostly black and white, all brand new stories. There was comics out that reprinted American ones, mostly Marvel. I don't have any of those here at the moment, unfortunately. And they were black and whites as well. And they used to take the Marvel comics and split them up into smaller stories, because the stories in these comics here were about 4 or 5 pages long. Some of them even 3 pages long. So that's the kind of comics I was brought up with. The very first comic I read, and again unfortunately I don't have it here, was probably one of my brother and sister's magazines, which was called Lookin', which was a young person's magazine that had articles on movie stars, TV stars, music stars, footballers, sports people, and they also had little comic strips in there, mainly based on TV programs of the day. So you had Sapphire and Steel, The A-Team, Knight Rider. If you can Google 80s TV shows in Britain, chances are there would be no comic strip in Lookin' about it. So I started at a very, very early age, probably about 3 or 4 years old. When my brother and sisters, finished with their magazine, I would toodle off and pick up the magazine and look at the pictures, and that's basically how I started reading as well. Then my parents realised that I was obviously interested in looking at these magazines, so they decided to get me my own. And one of the first magazines I was given was this one. Good old Eagle. Now this is the second series of the Eagle comic that came out. The first one was around about 1940s, 1950s when it first came out, and it was huge. The actual original size of the original Eagle comics was like that, and it opened up that way. Yeah. Excuse me. So yeah, again, this one had not just drawings in it, it also had photographic comic strips in there as well, which was pretty cool. This one's Mannix, which was about a robot that looked like a human, and it was basically a secret agent for the British government. And the very first story of Mannix come out in 1981, if I remember correctly. 1981, 1982. The film Terminator come out about 1983, I think it was, 1984. So this character actually but it preceded the Terminator by at least a couple of years. Like I said, most of the comics around at that time were that was the only sci-fi comic and 2000 AD were the only sci-fi comics that were around at the time. Most of the other comics were things like this, Battle, or Warlord, or Valiant. There was a couple of adventure ones. One was called Action. One was called something that I can't remember at the moment. I'll get back to you on that one. But yeah, but they were all black and white, very few colour pages in there, and all there's packed with about, there must have been about 8 stories in the actual comic, but the stories only lasted for about 3 or 4 pages, maybe 5 pages at the most. So that was the comics that I was brought up on. That was the first comics I bought, or was given to me when I was younger. Then, at about the age of 6 years old, where I used to live was a little village just outside a town, a small town, and in that little village there was a football pitch, and just at the back of the football pitch there was this little wooded area. It wasn't big enough to be called a forest or wood, it was just a woody area, and us kids used to go there and muck about, play, climb trees, get muddy, you know, roll around in the leaves and such, and just, you know, have fun in that. And one day I went up there by myself, and it looked like somebody had tried to start a fire there. There was bits of newspaper, paper, magazines and such, and some of it was scorched, some of it was burnt, and there was some comics there as well. And this is the very first American comic, regardless of the fact that it's got 15p up there, which means it's the British variant, but this is the actual very first American comic I ever held in my hand. It was the only one there that wasn't ripped up, burnt, singed, damp, wet, mangled, you know, whatever, the worst things you could think. You know, it was like a comic book atrocity up there, really. You know, and this was the only one that survived, from what I could see. So I picked it up. I thought, oh, that looks different, and I sat down. I opened it up, and the first thing I noticed when I opened it up was it was in colour. Wow, it was in colour. Think about it. 6 years old. The only comics that you ever read were black and white with a couple of colour pages. This one was completely in colour. Fantastic. So I literally sat there in the wooded area, and I sat there and I read this comic from cover to cover. Even the Hostess Cupcakes advert I just devoured, so to speak. And I finished reading it. I curled it up, put it in my coat pocket, ran back home, sat down, and I read it again. And I was hooked. Completely and utterly hooked. I think that's one of the reasons why The Flash is my favourite comic book character. Because it was literally the first American all-colour comic that I read at 6 years old. So then a few days later my dad took me into town with him, and as always it was a case of, okay, you've got your Eagles, you've got your Battle, you know, you've got your weekly comics. Is there any other comics you want? Because my parents, seeing that I like to read comics, thought it would be a great idea to actually get me, you know, comics to learn how to read, which I think is a fantastic idea. I don't see why more parents don't do that nowadays. And so I was looking around to see if there's any other comics or magazines there, and just so happens that there was a stack of DC and Marvel comics in this newsagents in the town close to where I lived. And I was like, I want some of them. I want some of them. And yeah, 15p a pop for a comic. My dad said, okay, pick out 10, just to keep me quiet. So I went for them, picked out 10. I think there was Firestorm the Nuclear Man #1, a couple of Batman comics, probably Batman Detective comics. This is all from memory, and obviously, you know, being sort of 6 years old, my memory now isn't that good, but I can vaguely remember Firestorm the Nuclear Man. I think it might have even been issue 1 of that. There was definitely a couple of Batman comics, a couple of Spider-Man comics, and another few. I got 10 anyway, and my dad bought them for me. We walked around the town for a bit. He said, right, okay, I'm just popping into the bookies. You sit there, read your comics, don't move, I'll be out in a bit. Remember, this was in the times when you could actually tell kids to sit there and behave themselves, and they would. Yeah. So my dad went into the bookies. I sat down with a great big stack, well, to my young eyes, a great big stack of comics, and I read them, and I read them, and I read them, and that's how I got into reading comic books. Strangely enough, I didn't actually get into reading 2000 AD. This one, obviously, this isn't what it looks like now, but this is what it looked like when I first started reading 2000 AD. I didn't actually start getting into 2000 AD till round about my teenage years. I don't know why. Possibly because my parents thought that 2000 AD was a bit too mature for me at that young an age and such. But yeah, there's another one. This has got a fantastic cover by Kevin O'Neill. Absolutely amazing Kevin O'Neill cover. But yeah, it was only until I started getting older that I started reading 2000 AD, which now, strangely enough, is the only British weekly comic that that's any decent, really, unless you want to buy things like the Beano and the Dandy, which are basically they're children's comics, really. Which I used to read when I was younger as well. I used to read all the kids' comics: Whizzer and Chips, Beano and Dandy, Cheeky, Core, Hoot, and so yeah, that's really how I got into comic books. So, and I've just been reading them ever since. It's over 30 years now I've been reading comics, and I don't think there's ever going to be a time when I won't read comics. I will probably be buried with my comics, which might be a bit of a heck of a great big coffin, but there we go. So there you go. That's my how I got into comics video. I hope it was of some interest to some people out there. I'm not quite sure who to tag because I have no idea who has been tagged and who hasn't been tagged. So all I can say is, if you're watching this video and you enjoyed it and you want to make a video on how you got interested into comic books, then I'm tagging you to make your own video on how you got interested into comic books. Okay? Does that sound fair? Alright, okay. Right, well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you later. Ta-ta for now.